Hello and welcome to another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action, a series where leaders look back at decisions they've made and ask themselves a series of questions. I'm Peter Stiepelman, I'm your host, and I am an imperfect leader. I spent more than 20 years teaching and leading, first in the Oakland Public Schools in Oakland, California, and then in the Midwest, Missouri to be exact, where I was a teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent, and then the superintendent of the fourth largest district in the state of Missouri. I'm constantly striving to learn from my experiences and from the experiences of other leaders. The aim of this podcast is to lift the learning and lift the imperfect leaders up. That way, when you hear the term imperfect, you'll see strength. Strength from the candor needed to recognize imperfection as a real advantage. Let's get started. You can now pre-order my book, An Imperfect Leader, Human-Centered Leadership in After Action, by going to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and actually, I've been seeing it online at lots of bookstores. I am told that pre-ordering is an important part of the book publishing process, and so thank you so much for your support. About a year ago, my son had a bar mitzvah, and in the Jewish faith, a bar mitzvah is when a 13-year-old becomes a man. I can actually remember him being like, I'm a man. Like, sure you are, kid. And during the ceremony of a bar mitzvah, something really beautiful occurs. The rabbi calls the soon-to-be man to the front of the congregation. He invites the parents and the grandparents to join him, and they'll stand in a line and face the congregation. And at that moment, the rabbi will bring forth the Torah, like a really huge and heavy scroll, and hand it to the grandparents, who will then turn to the parents and hand it to them. And then they will carefully hand the Torah to their child. So in my case, my parents handed it to me, and I handed it to my son. And as this was all happening, the rabbi recites the words Lador Vador, which translates to mean from generation to generation. Now, this part of the service is really incredibly moving. It's tremendously symbolic. And, first of all, the three generations standing together and being reminded of their connection to each other is really beautiful. Secondly, the actual act of passing the Torah is poignant. As I mentioned, the Torah is really heavy, and so is the responsibility of carrying the expectations of the many generations that have come before you. The sacrifices and successes of those who came before you should be a focal point, particularly during this moment of joy and celebration. So the use of these life events, a First Communion for Catholics, or the Orangutan for Indian families celebrating their child becoming an adult, they are great reminders of how we got here today. We stand on the shoulders of those who come before us. My guest today speaks to the importance of telling these types of stories to accomplish great things in his community. It was such fun to spend time with Mike Redmond. Thanks for tuning in. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Dr. Mike Redmond is my guest. Mike is the superintendent of Shakopee Public Schools in Shakopee, Minnesota, a role he has had since 2018. Previously, Mike served as the superintendent for Goodhue Public Schools in Goodhue, Minnesota, was an executive director of secondary education for Stillwater Area Public Schools, served as a principal of John Glenn Middle School in Maplewood, Minnesota, and has been an assistant principal, a social studies teacher, a soccer coach, a basketball coach. Dr. Redmond is also an active member of the Minnesota Association of School Administrators, as well as the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. And Dr. Redmond is an adjunct professor for Winona State. Mike, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Hey, great to be with you today.
Mike, I'm so glad to meet you. You are my first superintendent guest from L'Étoile du Nord. Did I say that right? The Star of the North.
You did very well. The local soccer team uses that a lot, the Minnesota United.
Fantastic. Well, I must admit I did go online to figure this out, and I thought, that Minnesota's motto was always a land of 10,000 lakes, which I've also since learned Minnesota has 11,842 lakes to be exact. So, but I'm really excited to talk with you today. And I learned about you after reading an article you wrote titled Connecting the Dots Inside a Pyramid of Voters. One of the roles of a superintendent is to lead successful campaigns. In New York, for example, communities vote on the annual budget. And in most states, and certainly in Minnesota, when a school district puts a tax increase on the ballot, they're not allowed to advocate for a yes vote. And that makes sense to some extent. Using taxpayer money to advocate for certain positions is seen as inappropriate. So what school districts rely on are citizen committees to advocate on behalf of the school district. And that's what you did. The committee had a specific strategy that I found to be well conceived and well executed. Would you talk a little bit about the approach used by the committee to support the school district's ballot initiative?
Certainly. And I appreciate making that distinction. When we're speaking on behalf of the school district for an operating levy or a bond, we're informative, and any persuasive efforts are left to community committees outside of the school district. In Shakopee in 2021, we had a fantastic vote yes committee that got together and they created, if you, I'm going to use kind of a negative term. If you think, pyramid scheme, it was kind of like that, except this, I would argue, was a pyramid for good and really, really well implemented. You had 3 committee co-chairs, and then just picturing, kind of how those pyramids work in their simplest, kind of in the simplest terms. Their target was 4,001 votes. So they got, 20 leaders at the next level who would each go out and find 10 connectors, and the connectors, they had to go out and each connect with 20, find 200 connectors to each go out and connect with 20 people to get 4,000. And then there's some other phone banking and things, and they kind of left the people who were incredibly predisposed to voting yes to that group. And really, it was a nice way for parents to talk to parents. They divided it up by areas, by elementary schools in our community, and gave the people on the bottom of that pyramid a task that was pretty natural. Hey, you just asked me to go talk to other parents in my neighborhood about something that I care about. Yep. And my gosh, it once it gets moving, you have people and you're going, hey, you're not on that connector list, and they're out talking to people and doing whatever. But again, it empowered people to find a way to express themselves on an issue that they really cared about without being, especially you got to think about how politics have been in the US recently. They didn't want to be embroiled with that, but this was a way to go, hey, this is local. This is our kids, our schools, our community. Yeah, I'm going to talk to my neighbors and fellow parents.
It's interesting that you talk about that in terms of parents talking to parents. I think there's something to note for those who are considering launching a campaign like this. And that's that, at least from my perspective, or at least what I learned as a superintendent, was 90% of the community got their information from friends and neighbors. They don't get it from the newspaper. They don't get it from your quarterly. They don't get it from your weekly newsletter. They don't get it from any of that kind of stuff. They get it from the people that they trust. So the children come home, they say something, parents who have been to events say something, and they share it among themselves. So I think it was really strategic for the committee to be able to represent the school district in a way that really sort of worked door to door, essentially. What advice would you give to a superintendent involved in planning a bond or a tax levy campaign, knowing that their role is purely informational?
That's a tough one. I've been in a couple, one in Goodhue and one in Shakopee. And, when I think about that, I just go, really, the first piece is you're really adding another job on top of your current job. And if that doesn't make you kind of shudder a little bit and think, then we got to talk, because I might want their job. But and then you get into those basic things. Start early, plan well, make sure all those involved in sharing information they got to have those details 100% accurate. Because if somebody is out informing and they're incorrectly informing, undoing that is really, really complicated. And now you've lost trust with the people receiving that message, and you can't regain that very quickly. And so as hard as it sounds, I think the superintendent, your role is to really think of all the possible questions, all the possible challenges, all the possible ways it could go wrong before the questions get asked or before the challenges arise, and really kind of, press on those and think about talking points that go with that. And then the last thing, and I think you and I have done a pretty good job, as people who've been in education, but not doing this so far in this interview, but be really wary that we have a tendency as educators to talk in our own language of eduspeak, acronyms, lots of stuff like that. And for most people in the greater community, it turns them off. So again, it's that you got to figure out, how do you share this message that just comes loaded with acronyms and all kinds of weird educational funding things? How do you explain that in clear terms that anybody can understand?
Yeah, you've mentioned two things that I was thinking about. One, start early. My experience has been for those who enter the superintendency and their school board is saying, and we've got to have a bond that year, the first year of your superintendency, be really wary of that. I'm not sure if you would agree with that. However, it takes 18 months to run an efficient and an appropriate information campaign, because you need to get to know your district and you get to know how real it is in terms of what are the needs of the district. And then you're going from Rotaries to Kiwanis clubs to Lions to every group and feeling like you really do know the community. If your first out of the gate is we need to raise your taxes, or even if it's a no tax increase, they're still paying the interest on those loans 15, 30 years down the road. So you really want to make sure that you're starting early in your conversations. And then the second piece that you said in terms of EduSpeak, I think you're so right, is just to be really real. And I don't know how you feel about this. There's a sense of, how do I communicate that the community is going to get something out of this? There's sort of that, I hate to be sort of harsh, but it's like, what am I going to get from this? What do I get out of this? And so being really clear about why this is not just good for the school district, why it's good for the entire community.
Well, I really agree with that last point. And I taught a lot of economics when I was a high school teacher. And, in education, we get the human story, and you're trying to help each and every child reach, their greatest potential. And for people who are involved in that, and for the parents who are directly involved in that, they get that. But I think you're 100% right. When we start talking about the community, we have to almost shift our focus and go, why would I vote to raise my own taxes? What is it about education? What is it about my community school that would get me to do that, to make that decision? And it truly is, you have to frame things as it's an investment. And just like any investment, if you don't invest what you should in any resource, and I'm not going to talk about kids as widgets, but kind of that crossover to economics, if you don't invest adequately, boy, your return isn't what it should be. And the return has positive impacts all across the community. Our students are going to be the employees of the future. We're part of the community. You want to have a strong community. People decide to move to communities because, hey, it's got great schools, it's got a thriving economic system, it's got parks, trails, it's got all those things. And so when you can, frame it in that way, I think it really helps people to get behind that and go, yes, this is for the greater good. I get it. I get that, boy, if I spend X amount more money each year, that actually has a there's a multiplier effect long-term, and that is going to have an even greater positive impact on my community that I care about.
Love that. I met someone who, superintendent, had a failed levy, and the reason why I think it failed was their sort of compelling purpose for the community was, well, don't you want someone who can read your prescription down the road? Like when you're in the hospital, you want an educated community that, our kids today are going to be the ones taking care of you. And I thought, oh, that doesn't really land very well. Met another person who said, the community with the best schools win. And that really resonated because of everything you just said. Why will businesses stay in your community or relocate to come to your community? Because you have amazing schools, and that's what people want. In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension called leaders learning work, which is the mind or brains of an organization's work. And inside that dimension is exactly what we're talking about, using the power of language. And Mike, the power of language refers to how one frames situations, how they use story to paint a picture, rely on metaphors to break down complex ideas, those types of things. And I get a sense that you have a really good idea about how that works. How did you use the power of language to capture the hearts of your community without telling them how to vote?
Well, I think, and again, I'm going to mention Don Lifto, who, I would call him the lead author of the article, this Words on Wheels, that was in AASA's December issue of School Administrator. And he and I were an interesting team. He was my superintendent when I was a brand new teacher. I went away, worked overseas for a while, came back. So I like him. He hired me twice. So he's way up there. But we come at it very, very differently. And I tend to be, kind of the practitioner, boots on the ground, and he's an incredible intellect and a big picture thinker. And so that article was really about the words used in levy campaigns. And for me, it always comes back to stories. And and again, it's kind of that get away from eduspeak. How can I explain what we're doing in ways that will grab somebody and they'll go, oh yeah, I believe in that. That's a real positive. You and I've been in lots and lots of classrooms and I get to see, I was just there this morning doing many observations at one of our elementary schools. And what I saw, it's moving. There are so many great things going on, but they haven't been in schools for a long time. So how do I've got to put that into stories that they can relate to. It will connect with something in their past and they'll go, oh, I get it now.
Mike, I asked this question to everybody who is on our show, and so I'd like to ask it to you as well. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I'm doing it right now. I'm smiling and I think I chuckled a little bit. I hear that and it's one of those, it's interesting. It's a great way to poke somebody in a leadership role and get us to be human. I think when it comes to being an imperfect leader, I'm somewhere towards the top of the scoreboard. So I don't know, maybe I'm outside my office door. We should put imperfect leader on that nameplate.
Ooh, I'll send you some swag. Sure, why not?
I like it.
An imperfect leader works here.
Yeah.
An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action is supported by ILAA, a firm dedicated to supporting aspiring new and established leaders. For more information, please find them at human-centeredleaders.com. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest is Dr. Mike Redmond, Superintendent of Shakopee Public Schools in Shakopee, Minnesota. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they had to make, and then we discuss it. So, Mike, what happened?
Yeah. I'm gonna jump back a little. I find this question, I'm chuckling again. I often use a question very similar to this when interviewing candidates for jobs in my school district here. And, and of course, they've all kind of been trained in hey, take the negative and turn it quickly into a positive. And then I tell them they can't do that. And if they do that, it's really a bad answer. What I want to hear is,
I work too hard. I demand too much of myself, right? The sort of,
exactly.
Give us a positive and not so positive about yourself. I work too hard.
Because if it truly, and again, if you're going to be a good leader, you have to recognize that we're all imperfect. And that we're going to make mistakes. And the question is, what kind of mistakes are we going to make? Are they hustling mistakes, or are they, mistakes where we're kind of paralysis by analysis or whatever, or we can make them of commission or omission. And in my case, this would be one of those, you come in and, hey, we've got this professional learning plan. I'm new. And the questions I asked as I reflect on this, they were all about, hey, what were we doing? What was the delivery of this training? And of course, oh yeah, hey, we did this, we had this speaker, we bought these materials, we did whatever. Where do you think we are? Oh, we're doing great. What I didn't ask, what got overlooked, I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't asking what was happening on the other side of that equation. How's it being received? What's changed? How deeply implemented is it? Are people actually taking that and changing their practice in a meaningful, measurable, impactful way? And so I kind of then jumped in with where my perception was, which was totally wrong. Wow, we're way along the road on this. I just got to kind of come in and just get us to the finish line, and it's not that far away. And so, speaking in public and other places. And then after a while, it was, wait a second, I'm getting feedback going, we don't even know what you're talking about.
I was going to say, can you back us up for a quick second and tell us what is a professional learning plan?
Sure. In our case, this one was, this involved the way we assess student learning and trying to make it more authentic and more meaningful and more connected to actual learning rather than kind of perceptions of learning. And so.
And you were getting feedback that you were training teachers on how to do that. And one of the pieces that you overlooked was, and how are they receiving it? You were just getting, we did this sort of check this box. We met on Monday, check this box. We met at the end of the semester, check this box. We took our professional learning day that the district gives us and we did work on it.
Absolutely. Without getting the, hey, what is actually happening? What is changing on the other side of that? How's it being received? And in this case, it was adult learners. What were they learning? And then what were they changing in their practice, which is a totally different assessment. And I missed it. And then you look bad. I mean, it's that sick feeling in the stomach. It's those things where you realize, oh my gosh, I did a terrible job of assessing where we truly were. And I've actually made it worse because I'm pushing to get us across the finish line. And in reality, we got to go back and redo some of the things we've done because we really haven't left the starting blocks in a lot of places. And so you acknowledge that, and again, I think failures are part of learning and hustle mistakes are encouraged and all those things. And you go back and you regroup and you own it and you just go, hey, we're going to do this differently and better. But I still feel bad. We wasted a fair amount of time and energy because, I was too easily convinced we were in a place that we really weren't.
What did you learn about relationships?
That's good too. Good people are sometimes going to be hesitant to answer tough questions without being directly asked. And especially, it was another kind of aspect of the culture I was inheriting that I knew had some problems with trust and those things, and certainly didn't recognize how that played a role in this particular professional training. And really, it's you gotta convince people that there is, there's psychological safety. I'm not asking about weaknesses or failures or places we're coming up short to punish or do whatever. It's to really understand where we are so that we can move ahead efficiently and effectively and get to that end goal in the best manner possible. And so it's developing that level of trust. And then it's also, I blame myself. I didn't ask questions anywhere near good enough. It should have been, tell me what evidence we have of this actually being applied in practice. Where can I go see that? I should have gone and talked to some of the people who were allegedly well along in this practice, because I would have found out they weren't, and they needed more and better in the way of training.
I was going to ask you about what frustrated you, and it sounds like that was somewhat frustrating, and you put it on yourself. I'm curious, this plan, did you inherit this plan, or this was something that you said, we need to do this as a district. We need to look at how we assess children. We need to make it meaningful. It can't just be this one high stake type of assessment, but really making sure that the work that we do in our classrooms and the curriculum reflect authentic and genuine learning. How did it all come about in the first place?
I think in this case, it was inherited. It was something that I had done previously in different roles of leadership. And so I think there was genuine excitement because I'd seen it put into practice, seen it truly impact student learning in a positive way. And so that's all part of, whatever you want to call that perfect storm of, wow, this is great. We're doing really, really good things. And again, people had great intentions. I don't think there was no malice. There was no whatever. It just, they were answering the questions I was asking, which is, what had we done on the,
right. Did we have a training? Yes.
Side? Yeah.
It was as if they were taking the stand. I will just respond. Yeah. Did you have training? Yes.
Yeah. Well, and what have we done? And again, erroneously made the assumption, and I've never seen a training ever in my life at any level where, hey, the impact, in terms of the practice, the outcomes is 100% perfect and great the first time around. And, and learning, takes time, and you go back and you relearn, and it's a constant process. But and again, that frustration, it's just more that I had wasted time. I hadn't asked good enough questions. And again, I think a lot of people think of leadership as speaking. I think it's way more. We've got one mouth, two ears. We should be using, those proportionately. And if we ask great questions and we listen well, we're going to figure out how to connect things where we are and then find the best path moving forward to have the greatest success.
So I imagine in the end, there was something that was good that came out of this in terms of, you mentioned that you were frustrated that you hadn't done the due diligence. No, you mentioned you were frustrated that you hadn't gone into classrooms and observed the trainings in action, because it would have given you a sense of how things were going. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of this?
Well, I think it was a good learning experience. It became, it's become kind of a template, for how do you actually do professional learning? How do you do professional development? How do you deeply implement things? And we know that, and it was a good reminder that there's a lot more to it, and that perfect plan has never existed. And I think it's kind of what, when people think, oh, wow, teaching's easy. They watch a TV show and they delivered content. And it's like, the delivering content is like 2% of the job. It's building relationships with students. It's how do you say the right word at the right time with a student to motivate them to get over a hurdle or a challenge. And it's the same with adult learners, is how do we help them to do something that they want to do? How do we provide the right impetus at exactly the right time to get the greatest impact? And so it just, I think the best thing, we recognized the importance of asking tough questions, developed a culture where, hey, that's got to be part of it. I don't expect anybody to be perfect, but I expect us all to be, rowing very, very hard in the same direction with a lot of clarity. And if things don't go well, all right, let's figure it out. And then let's figure out what went wrong and let's do it better the next time. And so I think it's given us a lot of energy that, we'll put towards, every future endeavor of a similar kind.
I once had a board member who said, well, it's not brain surgery. And I said, you're right. It's not. It's more complicated than brain surgery. I said, you want to be a teacher or a leader in a very complex system? Yeah, no, it's not brain surgery. Brain surgery is a lot easier than this. Not that I know how to be a brain surgeon, but there's probably a fairly standard way of approaching things. You don't, sort of open up the head and go like, today I'm going to try to figure this out. No, I mean, there's sort of a standard way of doing things. And when you're talking about children, each developing in a different way, each with different strengths, and the same thing with our adult learners, it's more complex. And I wonder, when you were saying, so what, this morning you were in classrooms. What was something that you were looking at?
Well, we go and do kind of mini, walkthroughs, mini observations. They tend to be kind of 6 to 10 minutes. So this happened to be an elementary, and they're unplanned. People don't know we're coming. I guess they know in general we're coming, and we go in and watch anything. And again, it's, for me, teaching is a science and it's an art. And I can watch, as the kids settle into your classroom at the start of the day, and it might even be, you haven't gotten into the lessons, you haven't gotten into the morning meeting, but what are the expectations? What kind of culture has been built? Do the kids know what they're supposed to do in that time? And it's fascinating. And when it's really well done, it's like magic. I mean, it is just fun to watch, and it's heartwarming. I can tell at this particular school, we've been doing a lot of work with what we call developmental designs, and the students, and we're talking young, elementary students, they've been kind of, hey, when people come into your room, they're like guests. So please, introduce yourself to them if you get a chance. So I bet I had, first, second, and third graders today. I bet I had, and I was only in 8 classrooms. I bet I had 30 different kids come up to me and introduce themselves to me. And that, you're just going, what a great life skill, to have a 7-year-old come up and go, so I am, so-and-so, what is your name? I'm Dr. Redmond. Oh boy. Yeah.
Well, it speaks to the cultural field.
Yeah.
It speaks to the cultural field that the teacher has created and the principal has created in that building, in terms of how everyone is valued and honored, specifically those who are guests in your school. Those buildings that you have entered in your career, not in your district currently, that you recognize when people are valued, because it says, we're glad you're here, and there's signs on the wall of student artwork and things like that. And then conversely, the buildings you enter where it's so clinical and it's, you need to sign in first before we'll even talk to you, kind of thing. So it's heartwarming to hear that in your district right now, there's such a cultural field that's been established where everyone is valued and honored. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, what a great life skill for a young child that, hey, I'm learning how to introduce myself to others. You're going to use that the rest of your life.
In the end, this podcast is designed to help those who are aspiring, who are new to the career in leadership, who are established leaders as well. And it's designed to learn from the experiences of other leaders. So with that in mind, what advice might you give to an aspiring leader?
Well, getting back to this, we're all imperfect leaders. I mean, I think it's you're going to make mistakes. We're human. Leadership is, a lot of the kind of the traditional historic perceptions of it, I think, are somewhat misguided. Yeah, there are times where you need to deal with things in a crisis and you need to be decisive, but more often it is truly seeing the big picture. It's connecting. As I said earlier, it's, using the two ears to listen and really understand, and using them more than the one mouth. You speak more to ask questions, more to understand, more to then, once you've, reached a consensus or you have a better understanding, now to, direct that forward and help it to move along. And so I think if people have that aspiration and they go, God, I'm hesitant for whatever reason, if it's in your heart, if it's in your mind that you think you could be a good educational leader, I would encourage anybody at that point to give it a shot. There is a little leap of faith. I described it as jumping off a cliff. I think when I left teaching and moved into administration, very different, but we need great people who are reluctant to leave working directly with kids to move into educational leadership roles, because that work is also incredibly, incredibly important.
My guest today was Dr. Mike Redmond. And Mike, my predecessor once told me that you can meet all your goals on your evaluation. Attendance can increase, graduation rates can increase, suspension rates can improve, kids can get perfect ACT scores, win state championships, be national merit finalists. But if you're unsuccessful on a campaign, like a bond or levy campaign, you better start looking for another job. And so this is why I really wanted to talk with you. The added benefit was all of your sage advice on leadership as well for the instructional piece, because they are two different jobs. You have such a good and practical way for our colleagues across the nation who are trying to figure out how to approach this critical role of the superintendent. And I just thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader. Leadership in After Action.